How does one of the greatest strikers in the history of the Premier League, a man who spent his whole career outsmarting world-class defenders, end up being outmanoeuvred by his own financial advisor? Can you imagine trusting someone with your entire life's work, with your pension, with your family's future, only to find out that the man holding the briefcase was playing a totally different ballgame? Well, today we're looking at Alan Shearer's own financial advisor and how he refused to admit that he did anything wrong, blaming his client's own greed even when the evidence was staring him in the face. Well, this isn't just a story about football or just about money. This is a true lesson in human behaviour, in trust, and how even smart, super successful people can fall victim to poor financial advice. I've dug deep into the court documents, the news reports, and the official decisions to bring you the full picture, because by understanding these stories, you can spot warning signs, avoid the similar traps, and protect yourself from some really costly mistakes. Now, for many, Alan Shearer is a household name. In fact, the Premier League's all-time top scorer and a literal icon in Newcastle, and in my home growing up with a Newcastle United mad dad. But off the pitch, like many of us, he wasn't an expert in complex global investments. And in the early 2000s, Shearer entered a professional relationship with Kevin Neal, a director at Kevin Neal Associates Limited. Now, for over a decade, he relied on his expertise, believing that his wealth was being looked after. And while Alan Shearer was focused on his career, Neal's business was beginning to crumble. And by 2013, his original advice firm went into compulsory liquidation. Undeterred, he set up a new entity, Kevin Neal Associates Wealth Management, essentially to carry on the same business. In an attempt to keep his licenses during this time, he and his wife signed a deed poll document in 2011. Now, this document legally bound the new firm to pay for any financial ombudsman service updates and awards that were held against the old firm. But there was red flags everywhere, and by May 2014, at least 6 ombudsman decisions have been ruled against him, totalling over £573,000. Now, fortunately for those people, because of that document he signed, the new company was on the hook for these old debts too. But by 2017, things exploded. Shearer launched a £9 million High Court lawsuit against Kevin Neal and the pension specialist. Now, he alleged that the advice he received was not just negligent and careless, but was actually dishonest. And they argued that him and his wife had limited knowledge of these investments, but were steered by the advisor into high-risk death bonds that were totally inappropriate for their goals. Well, the drama reached its peak just as Shearer was about to take the witness stand. Unfortunately, instead of a public grilling, a confidential out-of-court settlement was reached for an undisclosed sum. But while Shearer found a resolution, Neal's world continued to unravel. You see, the financial services compensation scheme eventually paid out about £3 million to all the other clients who had been burned by the same firm. And the shocking part, well, even after the firm was insolvent, Neal was caught moving his assets, including luxury cars and thousands of pounds, to associates rather than leaving them available for creditors. This led to him being banned to act as a company director for 6 years. Yet through all of this, his defence was that he acted in good faith, and he remarkably accused the claims as being driven by pure greed and ego. So why would a man who's been banned by regulators and sued by icons still insist that he's the victim? Well, it could be a classic case of belief perseverance. You see, in behaviour, once we've formed an internal theory about who we are, our characters, the type of people we are, we've become very resistant to any facts that disprove it. So we start to rationalise. You know, I'm not a negligent advisor. I'm just a man who was pushed by greedy clients into making risky investment choices. Then we look at cognitive dissonance. So when the High Court or the Ombudsman tells you that you've done something wrong, it creates this uncomfortable mental conflict. And in order to resolve that tension, the brain often doubles down to protect the ego. And this is why, as late as 2020, Shearer had to hire some private investigators to find Neal as he was still owed £230,000 from that settlement. And Neal claimed he was in Spain with a foot injury until the private investigators took photos of him loading up a car in Hertfordshire, and ultimately the High Court allowed Shearer to access the funds direct from his accounts. So how do you go on to spot someone like this before it's too late? Well, there's a red flag in terms of what they call phoenixing. This is where a financial advice firm closes and immediately opens a new one under a similar name. There's also an ombudsman trail, so you can check on the records, the Financial Ombudsman's public database. If there's a financial advisor with rulings against them for unsuitable advice, their history could well become your future. If you want to understand how intelligent, experienced people make catastrophic decisions that lead to crime and how to protect yourself from the same traps, please subscribe now. Next time, we'll be looking at systemic failures and why one firm ignored 900 warnings, all to protect their precious system. In the meantime, mind the money and watch the mind. See you next time.